Hi, this is Ian from retouchingschool.com, and in today's tutorial I'd like to show you how I process my RAWs. I always shoot on RAW, so it gives me a lot of flexibility with post-processing later. And I'm gonna show you basic process that I do on all the photos before I develop them in Photoshop and do maybe some other further edits there. So this is a picture before, like straight from the camera without any editing, and this is what I did with it in RAW. So I'm gonna show you how from this I go to this. Close it. So I'm gonna open several different images. Every of those images has different lighting and things like that. So I'm gonna show you how I deal with different exposures, different color balances, and so on. So first, right off the bat, I start with lens corrections, removal, chromatic aberration, and enable profile corrections. That's what I do first. So what that does do, this photo was shot on 85 millimeter lens, so that will give me a lot of lens, the chromatic aberration, sometimes more than I can remove through the automatic feature. Let's see if we can see it better. You can see it here. This is how it was before. You can see it disappeared here in the arm. But if that's not enough, you can do it manually here. Let's see. Getting rid of the purple. See here, disappears back nicely. And here in the green, just desaturate just a little bit. Depends on the picture. See, way better. But most of the normal chromatic aberrations disappears through the automatic, and that's how I mostly that's where I mostly leave it. The other thing is the enable profile corrections, which as you can see, kind of gets rid of the vignetting and it straightens up the picture a bit. Depends on the lens. This is 85, so the distortion is not as big, but it fixes it up a little bit. And we can start with pictures that is corrected. The second thing I do is sharpening. So this was shot with pretty high ISO, 2500. Maybe I'm just gonna lighten up this image a little bit so you can see the grain in her hair too. So what I do here, mostly for most of the pictures I do 50 for amount. Sorry. And I pressed something and I didn't want to do that. All right. So I go with 50. with luminance for high ISOs, I would go around 40, and you can see all the grain disappears nicely. You can play with the radius, maybe sharpen eyes a little bit, detail. But mostly these are the values. $50, 30 through 60, it depends on the ISO. So if that was ISO, for example, 200 here, I would do probably just 40 in luminance. And then to get rid of the color noise that shows up mostly in blacks, I use color, and I put the value on it at 50, and it gets rid of all that colored grain. I'm gonna show you how it basically looks, or what I mean when I overdo it. Put it back. Yeah, you have a lot of this colored grain in the picture. Can have if you use high ISO, especially. So you get rid of it by, if you set this value on 50, it gets rid of most of the colored grain. Alright, so that's the sharpening. So again, you know, the amount I'll leave at 50. Mostly luminance around 30, 40, 60, something like that. Color 50. The rest of the values I mostly don't touch. So you gotta realize it's gonna go mostly online. You gotta downsize it, maybe sharpen it a little bit, and that will get rid of, you know, all that grain and everything. And you will end up with really nice sharp image. So let me just put back the exposure. So this is what I do with the sharpening on all the images. And then finally I go to basic color corrections. This is where it really starts. Actually, before that I always do a little curve, just a little one. Just give it a little bit more contrast. You can see on my website, janhanushphotography.com, JANHANUS photography.com, that my images are like very bright, contrasty, and have a lot of color. So I always do the slight curve as well. That kind of, even when it's a little adjustment, eventually piling up all the different adjustments will, you know, get you to a very contrasty colored picture. So here you can see, you know, there's a lot of, it's a little bit underexposed because we had here the window. You know, mostly I shoot with natural ambient light on white auto balance, and I get pretty good results because I shoot in RAW. I can I get a lot of flexibility later, so even if I have pictures that are a little bit overexposed, underexposed, I can bring all the details back. So shooting in RAW that's #1 rule. So here I'll play with the exposure. I want a little bit more light in her face. And again, it kind of depends on you. There's really no rule. So depends on what you what do you want to express with the picture, you know, how you want people to look at it. So so exposure a little bit up, contrast I put always on 12. I don't know why, but that has been working for me the best. And this is where it really starts. I bring the highlights sometimes all the way down. And you can see here, get all that detail back. I'm gonna put it back. See here in the window, getting all the detail back. Very nice. And shadows, basically the same thing, almost all the way back. And then maybe I bring the exposure a little bit back. Whites a little bit up. So what the whites does, it will lighten up the light areas of the picture without losing a lot of detail in it. Clarity, mostly on 20. That will give me a little bit more, again, that contrast, the painterly contrast. Sometimes I do it more, but mostly I start with 20. Sometimes when you have faces, you know, the edges of the face bordering with something like a light part, it can add too much of then the faces might start looking like kind of dirty. That's not a problem with this photo, but if you do the clarity too much, it might. Let's see. Yeah, it's still pretty good, but still leave it on 20. And then I add mostly 30 value of vibrance. I do not ever use saturation. The difference between vibrance and saturation is that vibrance will saturate everything but skin tones. It touches the skin tones to the last. So if you have a lot of orange in faces, like these people are, you know, sweaty and red, it will add a little bit of the color in their faces too, but not as much as saturation, when the faces, as you can see, start looking like unnatural. Saturation saturates everything, whereas vibrance touches the skin tones very little. And everything else, see, even if I bump it up way more, the people kind of still look kind of okay. And you see more, you know, more color here in the shirts, here in the magenta shirt and blue shirt. But mostly I leave it around 30. And then maybe I'm gonna play with the temperature a little bit. You know, maybe I want it a little bit colder, just a little bit. Maybe something like this. Maybe I'll put back the exposure a little bit. Now I want to bring more focus on her, so I can go back and add a little bit of vignetting. You know, midpoint. Yeah, so that's it. So you get this from, I'm sorry. From this. You get this. It's pretty good. Then I would apply these basic corrections on all the other pictures. Sync it all. And what happens, of course, like this was a different color balance. So again, I would, you know, bring the exposure down a little bit. Add a little bit more yellow. And you can see here, Again, this was really high ISO 3200. You can see here with the highlights, I could bring a lot of detail in the curtains, a lot. With the shadows, I could bring, you know, a lot of detail here in the mom's clothes. If we look here with the color, I got rid of a lot of this colored grain. Here I could use maybe a little bit more. And there's still a little bit, but it's not as bad as it was before. Same here. I believe she's a senator, congresswoman. Just gonna bring exposure back a little bit. Gonna make it a little bit colder. You can see, you know, the curtain kind of get better. Back the highlights a little bit. Here with these images, now they're a little bit more blue. Probably lower exposure. Maybe his suit, what I can do, click on his suit with the white balance and it'll probably straighten up the colors a bit. Not bad. It was a really bright day. So maybe lower the exposure, put the shadows up. You know, you get all this detail here in his hand. If you zoom in, you know, you get all the detail in his hand and his face here in the shadows. This is previous conversion. See, this is how it was before. Sorry. So we brought all this detail here and here back, got more detail here in the shadows. Obama here. Same thing. He has a lot of shadows in his face, so I'm gonna just lighten it up a little bit. Same here. Yeah, so from this, you get this. And you can always desaturate it a little bit. You can always bring more detail in reds and blues with saturation. So if I desaturate it, I'll get a little bit more details here in reds. See, if I desaturate the blues, get a little bit more detail here. And then I can play with luminance and basically just darken it up maybe a little bit, blues, and get, you know, that a little bit back of the color back. Same here with the reds. But I was able to bring more detail here on his shirt. Yeah, so a quick recap. First, I do the lens corrections, remove chromatic aberration, enable profile corrections. Then I go to sharpening. I set the mount on 50, luminance around 40, and then color about around 50. Then I go to curves. I make a slight curve. And then I go to basic color corrections. I adjust exposure, contrast 12, highlights all the way down, or almost all the way down. Shadows, the same thing, all the way up. Maybe something almost all the way up. Whites around 40, 30, 40, depends on the image. I don't play with the blacks much. Then clarity 20, vibrance around 30 mostly. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. And then you play with the individual images. Depends on color balance here in temperature and tint. All right, so that's how I post-process my RAW. And I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Don't forget to check my blog at retouchingschool.com and my website for samples of my work at janhanus photography.com. And thank you very much for watching. Bye.